It's no secret I have great affection for the next generation, and also, by extension, the Playmates toys of the 90s. I've talked a lot in previous videos about the expansive range of this toy line, which wasn't just limited to one scale, but three. And as much as I loved all of these lines, my particular favourite was the 9-inch scale. To my mind, they seem to be a happy medium between an oversized 12-inch scale figure, which could be a bit bulky and a bit difficult to store away or put on display, and didn't have the same range of characters. And of course they're in sharp contrast to that small 5-inch scale figures, which were made purely of plastic and a lot more limited when it came to detailing. So in this video I'm going to take a look at some of my favourite aliens from the Next Generation line. I'll start off by looking at the Romulan Commander. This is one of my absolute favourites in the line. And a lot of that is down to purely the presentation of this figure and the tailoring on it, because I think it looks absolutely fantastic. Very screen accurate and it just looks really fun. There's a lot of different textures and fabrics at work in this outfit. I particularly like the sash here, which goes under the belt, and it's a sort of sparkly material so that it lights up very nicely in the light, which is fantastic. Meanwhile, his actual tunic there is kind of padded, and it's got this sort of soft but glossy feel to it, and I think it looks absolutely great. And I love how there's individual little bits of colouring underneath that grid pattern there, which I think just gives it a little bit extra interest. As with virtually every figure in the line, he's got those standard moulded boots, but it works perfectly well for the Romulan, and this looks pretty good. In terms of the likeness, I don't think this is meant to be any Romulan in particular. It's certainly not meant to be a reoccurring character like Tomahawk or anyone like that. Instead, what we've got here is a generic Romulan, and I think this is a really smart choice, and it makes him much more versatile. And in terms of likeness, well, although I can't compare him to anyone in particular, this definitely looks like what a Romulan should look like, and I think they've done a really nice job. If I was nitpicking, the only criticism I could have of this figure really is around the lips. He's unfortunate that he's one of the ones where they've given this very vibrant lipstick, which just spoils the look of the character. The articulation on these figures is identical because the body molds are pretty much the same for every single one, so I'll just run through just the ones here in case you've never had one of these figures before. His head is a swivel, so it rotates 360 degrees, but it isn't a ball joint. It doesn't look up or down, it just literally spins from side to side. He does have ball jointed shoulders, however, so he can kick his arms out and up, which is great, and he's got a single jointed elbow. There is no waist or ab articulation at all. He has fantastic hinged hips, so his legs can go out a really good distance, which is fantastic, and of course they kick forwards an awful lot, and also extend backwards as well, so this is a fantastic joint. I think it works really well. He's also got single jointed knees, and that's it. There's nothing at the boot calf, there's nothing at the foot at all. One of the things that I'm quite critical of about this line is the choice of paint apps for the weapons. The weapons themselves are usually moulded perfectly, they look like mini replicas, which is absolutely fantastic, but they're often not painted, and it really could be so much more enhanced if they just have a little bit of paint in there just to separate the colours and make it a bit more, what you see on screen, a bit more screen accurate. However, I think, in the case of the Romulan Disruptor, this works pretty well, because from memory, I think they are all black anyway, so this gets away with it nicely. Now, interestingly, he also comes with a phaser rifle. Now, this is a Starfleet weapon, so I'm not quite sure why it's been packaged in with the Romulan. Funnily enough, even in the smaller 5-inch scale, the same thing happens. With the Romulan figure there, he also comes with the phaser rifle. And again, doesn't really make a lot of sense. I think possibly in one of the episodes they might have one, and that seems to have been maybe the source, inspiration, reference material that they've used when they're making the figures. That said, I do think that this is a really good example of how amazing these weapons can look when they actually are painted. As you can see, there's multiple colours on here. There's blue, there's black, there's silver, and it looks fantastic. And when we put it in one of the hands of one of the Starfleet officers, like Picard here, it looks brilliant. Next up, we have Worf as a Klingon. Now, I prefer to think of this really as a generic Klingon as opposed to being specifically Worf. The reason is that we never got just a generic Klingon in this line, so this will have to do. Now, this figure is quite ambitious, and I imagine it must have been fairly daunting when they had to come up with a way of replicating this character and specifically this design in toy form. But they've done a pretty solid job. If we look at things like the gauntlets, which you can see are just snap-on, clip-on gauntlets, but on one side they look really good with the little paint apps there. I think it's a nice little touch. And there's an extra layer of detail there that, would have been easy to ignore. I love the detail in the tunic. The fact that they've tried to recreate that armour effect is really nice with a lot of metallic kind of paints, lots of different fabrics going on, just to give it that different texture and recreate that sort of effect that we see on screen. Things like the belt are nicely painted, there's different colours going on there, and look at the knife as well, again, having two different tones in there just brings it to life and it looks really solid. The same is true for the disruptor as well. Having those two tones, the gold and the black, work really well together, and it just brings the weapon to life and just makes it look a lot more authentic and interesting. And whilst the tunic is fabric, the sash and the shoulder pads are a plastic piece to recreate that armour effect, and I think it's very successful. Okay, time to address the elephant in the room, the hair. I did say it was ambitious. They've opted to give him doll's hair here. I don't think it's very successful. As you can see with mine, over time it's become very, very matted and it doesn't look very good at all. When you swish it about there, it's a little bit too doll-like and it just doesn't look good ultimately. I think it was a nice attempt to do something different and kind of fun, but yeah, I don't think this works quite as well as intended. But overall, I'm very happy with this figure. I think he's a really cool addition to the collection. As I said, he's quite ambitious. Some things work, some things didn't, but overall, it's a pretty good looking figure. And now we're on to the Borg. Now I think this might just be my favourite in the entire collection. Yes, I'm a huge Borg fan, and who isn't? But I do think they broke the mould of this figure. I mean, just look at the detailing on this outfit. It's absolutely insane. All those wires and bumps and grooves and little bits and pieces are absolutely phenomenal. And it looks really, really good. And as if that wasn't enough, they even include extra pipes in the packaging there so that you can stick into him and put in different places so you can have a bit more versatility in your Borg drone. Absolutely fantastic stuff. It looks absolutely brilliant, and I love that there's so much going on here that the eye is constantly busy and finding new things to look at. Once again, much like the Romulan, I don't think this is meant to be a specific Borg. I think it's just meant to be a generic drone, which is definitely my preference, really. That's how I kind of want to think of the Borg. I don't really want to necessarily have a Hugh figure. For example, I definitely want sort of the merciless enemy Borg drone, which is absolutely perfect. And hands down, my favourite thing about this figure is the gun arm. I think this is absolutely amazing. It just looks fantastic in terms, again, the detailing and what's gone into that. It's just so busy, it's fantastic. But I love the articulation as well. So it spins at the wrist there, which is, fantastic. And then it also has an extra swivel at the very end of it as well to create that probing effect. And I just think it looks really creepy and disturbing, but just fantastic. I love this to bits. Next up, we have Q in his judge's robe. This looks really, really nice. I think they've done a really good job of this. It is quite simple. It is fairly straightforward. It is just basically that loose material there. But to be fair, that is the effect of the costume. So yeah, I can't really knock it. I think it's a nicely presented toy. Although the figure does feature a strange squishable head. I'm not quite sure why his head is made of rubber, whereas all the others are a hard sort of rubber or plastic. His is very squishable, almost like a chew toy, so I'm not quite sure how they arrived at that decision. It's not bad, it doesn't look terrible, it's just strange. And I do think, if nothing else, the likeness is very strong. Now, I did think it might be interesting to put him up against the recent Q release from Mego to see how the two compare, and yeah, obviously the Playmates version is much taller, it's a much bulkier figure, but I have to say, surprisingly, I actually think the Mego one is better. I think the Playmates likeness is stronger than the Mego one. But that said, I think the costume on the Mego version is just much nicer. It's a much thicker material for the robe, therefore it's a deeper red, which is quite nice. You'll notice as well that they've actually moulded his hands in a red plastic to create that effect of the gloves, which I think is a really nice touch. And also, I really like the buttons on his robes there. They're actually separate pieces. They're actual individual little pieces that have been sewn in, which look really nice and they pop really well, as opposed to the Playmates version, which have just been painted on. And then finally, if we look at that big medallion around his neck, obviously it's a much larger, much more screen accurate on the Mego version than it is on the Playmates, which is much smaller and higher up his chest. Now, although not strictly an alien, I did think it'd be fun to look at the Sherlock Holmes data because I just love this figure and I think it's really incredibly tailored and it just looks fantastic. And I love some of the props he's given as well. You'll notice he has the full outfit here, which is really cool, including the deerstalker, which is a nice fabric piece which is all sewn together, and it just looks fantastic. And he just places it on his head there, and it just looks really good. Rather than being, say, a plastic piece or molded into the head, this is a nice touch. Likewise, I love the big heavy overcoat that he's got, how detailed that is, and then of course he's got his coat underneath that, and then a waistcoat underneath that. So I think you have to give it top marks for the tailoring of this outfit, and the textures are absolutely fantastic. I love this a bit. And I think his accessories are really fun as well. They've given him his violin here, which again is nicely painted, nicely sculpted. They've done a really fantastic job of this. And of course, here he is with his magnifying glass as well, which again is just a cool little thing and a fun little extra to have that makes the figure really pop. And if you wanted, you could recycle these clothes and actually have a legitimate Sherlock Holmes figure. And to accompany him, we have, of course, Geordie as Dr. Watson. Again, the outfit on this looks really, really cool. It's not as lavish as the Sherlock Holmes, but it is nicely done. You can see there's lots of little detailing in the costume there to just make it look a bit more textured and a bit more stitched, which is nice. And again, underneath his blazer jacket there, he's got a sort of mock waistcoat, which admittedly isn't as striking because, of course, it is just painted in and it is one piece, so that's not as thrilling, but it is still a nice touch, and I like that they give him the necktie there as well. So overall, I do think this is still really presentable and looks fantastic. He also comes with Dr. Watson's journal. There is a pen stuck on it, which is great when it's lying flat, but if you want to put it in his hand, it does look a little bit surreal, but maybe something's gone wrong with the holodeck. And I think when you put both of these figures together, they look really, really cool. I think they look like a really striking pair, and I think they look fun, both as Star Trek figures, but also, like I said, if you wanted to recycle and put other figures in these clothes, I think they're still going to look really good as a Dr. Watson and Sherlock Holmes pair. So there you go, there is my overview of some of my favourite Star Trek Next Generation aliens. They definitely had the bulk of the aliens in this line. There were other lines dedicated to Voyager and Deep Space Nine, but they didn't really have many aliens in them, so Next Generation were definitely the lucky ones for that. And I think actually some of these, if not all of them, actually represent the best of the 9-inch scale line in my opinion. If you enjoyed this video, please do give it a like and remember to subscribe as there'll be plenty more videos soon.